Hey guys, this video is going to be an overview of cellular respiration, which is the process where we take carbohydrates like a glucose and break it down into usable form of energy that we like to call ATP. This process is going to occur in a special organelle called the mitochondria, which I have drawn right here. So the mitochondria has a couple parts that are important to note, and that is going to be the inner membrane, which is this darker squiggle in the center of the mitochondria. It's got an outer membrane, which is going to separate it from the cytosol, which would be out here, right? I think cytosol means cell solution. So that's just what the organelles float around in. You have this inner membrane space here. And then, of course, the matrix, which is going to be this space in the middle. So you've basically got membranes and then spaces in between and inside of those membranes. Matrix being in the inside of the inner membrane, and then the intermembrane space being the space in between the outer and inner membrane. So the mitochondria is going to be found not just in animal cells, but also in plant cells as well. So that's going to be important to remember for sure, because plants actually do both cellular respiration and photosynthesis. It's important to note all the different areas of the mitochondria because different processes of cellular respiration are going to occur in different parts of the mitochondria, which is going to come back in some other videos I'm going to make with all the steps of cellular respiration. So here is a side-by-side comparison of our animal cell and our plant cell. So I do like to show this before I get into the equation for cellular respiration because it's really easy to not see that you have mitochondria in the animal cell, which is they're blue in this picture, and then you have mitochondria in plant cells as well. So the big difference between animals and plants isn't that they don't do cellular respiration. They don't both do it. It's that how they get the sugars that make cellular respiration possible is different. So plants are going to create their sugars in this organelle called the chloroplast, where photosynthesis occurs. And animal cells, which could be us, right? You can think of human beings as animals. We have to eat our food to get the glucose. We don't make it in this cell. Our cells do not make sugars, so we have to rely on getting our food from our environment. This is a really important note because I think a lot of students always make the mistake that plants photosynthesize and animals respirate, and it is not true. Plants do photosynthesize, but they do cellular respiration as well, which is why when you place a plant in the dark, a lot of times it'll actually shrink over the course of a few weeks, just because it's actually breaking down those glucoses it's created, but if it's in the dark, it's not making any more. So it's almost like it's starving, right? So it's going to start using up the glucose stores. And how does it do that? Well, it breaks down all that glucose in the mitochondria. So it's not like the plant magically just loses mass or like shrinks over the course of a few weeks. It's eating itself away because it has no source of food, which in this case is sunlight. So if you put a plant in the dark, it will actually lose mass. Let's take a look at that cellular respiration formula. So cellular respiration is an energy releasing or a catabolic reaction, which means we're breaking the reactants down into something less complex. So the reactants are actually going to have more free energy than the products. So in this case, the reactants are going to be some oxygen. So I always think of cellular respiration. I think of it as, this is what I do. So I breathe oxygen in, and I also eat food, and that is going to be our glucose molecule, which is also a reactant. So these are going to go into the process. So think we breathe in oxygen and we eat food, which is taking food in. And that is going to be changed into carbon dioxide, which we breathe out. It's going to release some water vapor, which we also breathe out. And then it's going to make something called ATP, which is going to be the goal of this process, is to make ATP, because that is the energy that our body runs on. So you can see we breathe out CO2 in water, so it's not really useful, but that ATP we keep, and these are the products. And all of that ATP is going to be made using energy that is broken down from the bonds stored in this glucose molecule. So this is a redox reaction. Recap, redox means that one of the reactants is going to lose electrons, and one of the reactants is going to gain them. So redox being reduction gains and oxidation loses. You could also think of reduction as something is gaining complexity, because every time a molecule gains an electron, it's going to be gaining complexity, and every time a molecule loses, it's going to be losing complexity. So when we look at our equation up here, our glucose molecule, which is carbon based, is going to be broken down and actually is going to turn into carbon dioxide. So it is actually going to lose electrons in this process. Every time you break bonds, it's going to release electrons. So you can think, well, if we're breaking the glucose apart, every time we break it into different pieces, it's going to lose electrons. So eventually it's going to lose and break all of the bonds in the C6H12O6 and become carbon dioxide. Water, on the product side, is going to actually come from the oxygen on the reactant side. So oxygen is going to be reduced. So all those electrons that come from the glucose are going to wind up in our oxygen, and it's going to be reduced into water. So how do the electrons get from the bonds releasing when we break glucose to the oxygen molecule? Well, they're going to be carried from glucose to oxygen, and the carrier in cellular respiration is going to be NADH. NADH would be the full version of the carrier, meaning that it has the electron, and NAD plus would be the empty version. So the version that will pick up an electron but doesn't have it. So NAD plus will pick up an electron from glucose and become NADH, which will drop off the electron to oxygen and become NAD plus again. So that in a nutshell is the overview of cellular respiration. I'm going to be making a couple more videos that are going to show how we break the glucose down and how we use oxygen, and how all of this somehow makes ATP.